All right. It is 6 o'clock, and you are here, and we are here. Welcome, everyone. This is an ILEC webinar, and we have some actual real teachers here who are going to talk about the science of reading mandates, and you're going to hear from me as little as possible. And I do want you to be part of the conversation. So include your questions in the chat, and I will relay them there. Let's start out by introducing yourself. Melinda, who are you?
Hi, I'm Melinda Karchner. I am a teacher in Colorado. I've been teaching for 20 years. I have a master's in education, ton of credentials. I'm certified in Orton Gillingham. I'm currently teaching fourth grade.
Okay. And Kate.
Hi, I'm Kate Mitchell. I am a literacy intervention specialist in Minnesota. I'm also a doctoral candidate at Texas Women's University. I am a former reading recovery teacher. I also have Orton Gillingham training, Wilson training, and SIPS training.
Wow. Elena.
Hello, everybody. My name is Elena Roa Albert. I have been teaching for 7 years bilingual students. I'm a bilingual teacher. I also have a master in bilingual, multicultural, multilingual studies at Texas Women's University, and also I am candidate graduate at Texas Women's University as well.
Wonderful. And Sarah.
Hello, I'm Sarah Schnelly from Southern Wisconsin. I am a literacy interventionist and coach who also provides special ed instruction when needed at a small rural elementary in Southern Wisconsin. I have a master's in literacy and learning disabilities, and I'm board certified in early childhood literacy. And I'm also certified in SIPS and had early reading empowerment training. But for the purpose of this discussion, I also have 3 children, one of whom is struggling as a reader and on a reading plan in the state of Wisconsin.
Very good. All right, let's get right down to it. How are the science of reading mandates impacting you, impacting your practice?
I can start. So the first thing that happened for my district is we no longer use reading recovery. We were all, as interventionists, already trained in structured literacy interventions and were able to use those. But we had to get rid of reading recovery for our first grade students. So that was a big change for our programming.
I think for us in Wisconsin, one of the immediate changes that was felt was the amount of time that is required to be compliant with the mandates versus the amount of time that we're allowed to actually plan for our teaching practices or spend any time in collaboration with other teachers. The requirements are such that they've stopped in many cases not just reading intervention, but in some cases actual reading instruction for 4 or 5 weeks at a time, so that we can comply with the writing of the plans and or the diagnostic assessments, many of which don't give us the information that we actually need to continue to teach our students. So then we're adding additional assessments on top of that.
Elena.
Yeah, I forgot to tell you that I'm from Texas, and for me as a bilingual teacher, impact my students and I, as everybody know, Spanish and English are not teaching in the same way. Bilingual students, they don't learn to read in the same way as a monolingual English-speaking students. So when these changes came, we have to come out with our own curriculum because by then we didn't have like phonics curriculum for Spanish. So besides to being in the training for reading academies, we have to come out with, okay, how we're going to teach our bilingual students phonics. So, and I collaborate with the district where I was working to create a curriculum for phonics, orthography, and grammar for my third grade students. So it was a huge impact by then.
So picking up on that time, how has that impacted your time and how has that impacted your teaching or ability to teach?
I'll piggyback off of what Sarah said. We also have mandated screening that we have to do with our students in K through 3. So those are one-on-one assessments. And so that takes away instructional time in order to give these screenings 3 times a year. We also had state mandated PD, which took up like 30 to 60 hours of teachers' time to get through that as well.
We do have the state mandated professional development also, but the actual learning process for learning how to use the assessments themselves was another pretty heavy lift. So that was a fair amount of time in addition, but then simultaneously, our state mandated new curricula. And while it didn't, districts that choose not to use the state mandated curricula can do so as long as they meet a long set of requirements, but then they can't apply for state grant money. Right now, the money hasn't been released anyway, and we don't know if we're ever going to see it. But I think out of fear, because these new programs are so expensive, and any curricular product is expensive, I suppose. But these new purchases will cost the district so much money that curriculum and instruction directors, out of fear in some ways of retribution from community members or school board members or whomever, if they don't buy something off of the list, we're scrambling to do so, but also are concerned that they may not have the funds that other districts who went with something off the list did. So by making those quick shifts in curriculum, we didn't go through the curricular cycle that we normally would. And we're going to find ourselves in a pretty heavy learning curve with that as well. So it's a lot of change and teacher learning time. I think we've kind of hit a cognitive load for a lot of people.
We'll get back to retribution, but someone is interested in knowing about the diagnostics. What are the screeners, Kate, that you referred to, and Sarah? Diagnostics.
Our state has mandated the company called Ames Web as a screener, and that screener then has the company has its own set of diagnostics, but we're not required to use those specifically. We are required to use additional assessments that meet criteria set forth in the legislation that we have. And other districts are using other type of assessments, but they pretty much all include some kind of oral reading fluency assessment, or and then I think there's something like letter naming. The idea is to work backwards to try to find the student's point of breakdown, and it's looking at reading as though it's a set of isolated skills and not a comprehensive sort of complex process. And our screener isn't available in it's available in Spanish, but it's not normed in Spanish, and it's not available in any other languages. And there's no opt-out clause other than for the very first screening assessment. So every student, regardless of their language proficiency or disability, has to take the assessment within a couple of months of potentially having arrived in the country. And then those diagnostics are something that would follow that screening. I don't know if that answers the question, but.
Yep. I want to get to Elaine in just a minute, but Kate, do you have, what is your experience with the screeners?
So the state of Minnesota chose a couple of different batteries of assessment. So my district adopted FastBridge, and it's the same kind of thing that Sarah talked about, but it's a battery of assessments. There's early reading skills like letter sounds, decodable words, and then there's a fluency passage for the older kids. But it's all isolated skills on the computer, and it's meant to be really a quick kind of temperature check to see what kids are able to do.
All right. Elena, do you have experience with screeners?
Well, we have several, and it's the same as Sarah mentioned, that there were many that weren't designed for bilingual students. And also I have to do running records for my students too. And I remember when they have to do the English running records, because my students have to do every single screener in English and Spanish, which signify a lot of time for my students out of instruction, because they have to take the double of the test of the rest of the school. So I remember one of my students, he could understand what he was reading, but he couldn't tell to the person that was texting him in English. So he was put in a lower level of reading just because he couldn't. But when I asked him in Spanish, he could answer me everything that he was reading. So his comprehension was right, but he was graded as a low reader just because he couldn't have answered the question, or he didn't have the academic vocabulary to answer those questions. So I have many cases of that too.
Is it safe to say you're not satisfied with the screeners?
Not really, because sometimes it's not holistic. We are taking just one part of the students, specifically when they are being testing in English just.
Yeah. Someone wants to know, did any state do a statewide needs assessment to determine what the unique needs for students are? Or was it based on speculation about the cause and solution?
Our state of Wisconsin did do a statewide needs assessment. I was actually part of the committee that was a part of that process at one point. But it's very difficult to get that kind of information because obviously it's dependent on participation by individual communities, districts, that kind of thing. So I think an attempt was made, but I'm not sure to what extent the information that we have really describes our state as a whole. Because again, when you think about communities that are maybe marginalized or not English speakers as their first language, the information that's going to be gleaned may not necessarily come in a representative way of all of the populations.
Melinda, do you have experience with screeners in Colorado?
Yeah, so I'm upper grades though. So from the upper grade lens, we still give core phonics as a screener. And I worry with core phonics that sometimes it sticks kids, especially with the nonsense words, especially if it's a kid with dyslexia, into an intervention that they might not read or need rather. And then our state has other screeners. iReady is the one that my district chooses. So we have, the state is trying to develop a dyslexia screener. We have various choices for early screeners, core phonics being one of them. And then the district can choose from iReady and others. I know a lot of districts are starting to move away from iReady, but it's still a choice from the list that's mandated.
And I know it's way too early, but do these screeners work? Oh, Sarah? They're supposed to solve the problem.
Yes and no.
Yeah, I mean, so I think we're dramatically over-identifying students, kind of what Gladys was saying about, or for reasons that don't maybe have anything to do with their reading ability, but maybe more to do with their engagement or with their language ability. if they were given as a means, to maybe collect one piece of information, and they didn't take so long, and she mentioned this as well, that diagnostic piece, in some cases for our youngest kids, and partly because we were first learning how to do it, but it was taking 2 hours a student. The students that were struggling the most in literacy ended up being removed from instruction for the greatest amount of time and having the most disruption to their learning. So that seems really unequitable to me. But maybe as we get more practice, we'll get better at it. But I think the challenge is the screener perhaps was meant to identify students that might be quote unquote at risk for future reading challenges. But in Wisconsin then, and maybe this is the same other places, I don't know, if they score below the 25th percentile on the screener, they're then required to have a reading plan. And the reading plan is a narrative that's quite lengthy and then requires hours and hours of teacher time to design the reading plan. You may have students who are nervous reading out loud, or students, we had a few that were just very contemplative, that would stop during the reading and think things out loud or make comments. And I had one little girl in particular, and this really struck me, how she said, "Oh, so when I read with you in small group, I'm supposed to think, but when I read at the computer, I just read really fast." And I basically had to say, yes, we have to differentiate between authentic reading and reading for the screener. But when you're in kindergarten or first grade or second grade, it's very difficult to teach that. And it seems to me to be leading them down the road, or it would be very easy for teachers to be tempted to go down the road of just teaching them to read really, really quickly and not considering those other aspects like vocabulary and comprehension. Because like I said, my daughter was given a reading plan, and she, by all accounts, reads on grade level. Her teacher has no concerns about her reading. She just reads a little bit slower than some. And also because of that, in Wisconsin, we are not, I'm under the understanding anyway at the moment, that we're not to be releasing third graders from a reading plan until we get their state testing scores in the spring, even if they make amazing progress and don't appear to require one anymore. We have to continue providing this plan. And on the flip side, my oldest son is a freshman in high school, so he's on the other end. He's in the top 10% of his class. He's a straight A student and taking AP classes as a freshman. He's still required to take the screener, which is not normed for him as a freshman, and starts out with ball, car, shoe. Pick the one that matches. I mean, it is such a complete waste of his time. And I think that's a district decision, but it's coming from this pressure, I think, from, that they're feeling at the state level, that all, students have to be screened because we might miss something otherwise. And it's just very silly.
Yep. All right, I'm trying to keep up with everyone online. Someone mentioned the difference between a screener and a diagnostic. Does someone want to chew on that?
So we use FastBridge as a screener. And then if a child shows up as below like the 25th percentile, we do further screening. So we don't need to see every kid or come up with a plan up for every child that is below the 25th percentile. If on our further screeners or further assessments, they show that there's not a need. So FastBridge for us is really a temperature check. However, within FastBridge, you can progress monitor using the same type of assessments. And I find those to be not necessarily as useful in monitoring student progress, because I'm not sure why. But I have found that the screener piece of FastBridge has helped us identify students. However, before we used it, I don't feel like we were missing kids either. We had other ways to do that as well. So this isn't like this groundbreaking thing that has allowed us to find all the kids who need support. I think we were already doing that, and we were doing that well. The other piece of the screener is you have adults coming into a classroom that students have no idea who this person is. You have 5 minutes to test them. They might have a speech impediment. They might have a different home language. So you don't always get an accurate score because you don't know this child, and you have 5 minutes to do it, and you're in a hallway and there's a class walking by. So I don't think it's the best use of our time all the time. But I have found that the screeners have helped us to identify kids that need support and need further testing.
Melinda, you said something before we started about your students' reaction to the mandated program.
Yeah, so I think a big thing that I'm experiencing, I think there's a lot of good in discussing the science of reading and discussing the science, and I think it's great that teachers are being exposed to the research. I think we are in the middle of an overcorrection, and I think one of the student repercussions of that is like my students with the program that we're using in fourth grade, we have one passage and we read the same passage 5 times. And the student reaction to that is losing any love of reading. And I think when this all came about, I think the biggest side effect was this overcorrection of we have to move very far away from the fact that, and I think it is fact, and I think it is backed by research, that kids do need the motivation and they do need to have a reason and a love for reading. And we've moved so far away from that now we're having like the week according to the program goes, we read the text and we'll do something like I don't know, finding inferences while we read it the first read, and then we answer some questions. And then the second read, we pick it apart a little bit more. And then the third read, we have to write an essay about it. And then the fourth read, we look at it through another lens. Maybe it's figurative language, maybe it's theme. And while all those things are important, of course, like kids need those skills, reading the same passage 5 times has caused this reaction where it's this real struggle for me, a teacher who has never in 20 years had a problem with engagement, getting my kids to engage with reading. Even my kids who deeply love reading are suddenly like, oh, take out your my books, and there's a big moan. And I'm finding myself having to both like acknowledge their feelings, like I get it, but this is what we have to do. And so I think with these mandates, what's hard is because it's mandated, there's this push to follow with fidelity, and no program is perfect. And I think we all know that. And I think anyone that's been teaching longer than a year knows that there's not a perfect program. And teachers really need the flexibility to adapt whatever tool they have in front of them to the students that are in front of them. And any program can be turned into something that is good. I think in the program that I'm using, there's nothing wrong with most of the passages. Some of them culturally are a little bit questionable, but most of them can be engaging. It's when the purpose of reading is not to read and dissect every single thing you read. And when in fourth grade, that's what you're presenting the purpose of reading, you're going to lose a lot of readers, especially your struggling readers. And I'm a parent of a child with dyslexia. My dad is dyslexic. I'm probably somewhere on the spectrum of dyslexic, especially when you have those struggling readers in fourth grade and you're taking away novels, for example, which is in a lot of the programs that are on a lot of these state mandated lists. There are no novels or no like truly engaging, like you do have to read for joy. There has to be those moments where you're reading from joy. And when you're taking that away and you're replacing it with just remedial work and you're doing this overcorrection, especially with your older struggler readers, they need that I want to read as well. And so teachers need to have that room within the science of reading, which again, like you can't defute the science. There's a lot of it that needs to be done. And it's so great that we're talking about it. but there's this but and that I feel like we're missing and we're not really even allowed to talk about sometimes. And that but and is what's going to get like my dyslexic students in fourth grade. They have their 45 to an hour a minute of direct instruction. Then they go to Wilson for 45 minutes. And then they come to me and we just read. Right now we're reading Restart and they run to my group. And they know that book is hard for them, but they're doing all of this other hard, heavy work. And then they're applying it to this thing that they want to read. And we laugh together. There was one, we were like falling out of our chairs laughing one day out of a chapter of this book. And they're really then like, now I have this purpose and this want to apply all of this heavy work that I'm doing in Wilson to this actual novel. And I think that has really been missing from this discussion and this really rushed, I like earlier, Sarah, I think said, it's this really rushed implementation of the science of reading where districts are being forced to very quickly adopt these programs without being able to really look at them and see how they're meeting the needs, and without really being able to dissect how can we use this as a tool to truly ensure that our students are getting to grade level. And part of that has to be that we have to have room as teachers to talk about and kind of move away from the very rigid fidelity of some of these programs. That was a lot.
Yeah, but I think one of the unfortunate things that goes along so much with what you said is that there are aspects of considering the science of reading that are well-intentioned and probably really meaningful. We do want to consider all the different parts of reading. We do want to elevate teacher expertise. We do want to provide professional development. We do want to be mindful about the curricular choices that we make. But in this rush to hurry and implement these things where we're kind of building the plane as we're flying it, so to speak, we may have really missed a great opportunity to do some of the best things for kids. And we've largely removed teacher decision-making and professionalism from every aspect of this process.
I think too, that teaching with fidelity piece, especially when you work with struggling readers, not all struggling readers are the same. Not all struggling readers need the exact same instruction. And so when we are given an OG curriculum that we're supposed to follow with fidelity, and it doesn't meet every student's need, and you feel as though you can't deviate to meet their needs, becomes really stressful and makes it really difficult to sit there every day and teach your kids. So that piece, that fidelity piece and having the autonomy to make decisions is a part of the science of reading movement and the mandates that I think is really kind of scary. Because none of those lawmakers, most of them have never taught a kid to read. And so when our voices aren't heard and when we aren't allowed to make instructional decisions for those kids in front of us, it's a huge disservice to everybody.
Yeah, and I would like to add that I taught third grade, second grade, and first grade. And right now I am interventionist. And I notice that when we have to implement all these changes, I lose my time of independent reading of my students. So they were reading wherever they feel they want to read. So they started loving. I remember seeing my third graders in love with what they're reading because it was what they choose to read. And then since we have to cover more about phonics, because I read somebody asking what is science of reading as a curriculum. The science of reading said that the students need to be structured and I don't remember the terms that they use and phonics. So we have to start for the sounds and names of letters and then construct over that to the comprehension, which sometimes it helps. It helps because sometimes we have struggle readers that can help, but not at the whole classroom because we have to invest so much time doing that that our students are losing time to start loving reading. And and the aspect of bilingual students, we need to incorporate a lot of cultural relevant text. But with these curriculums that we have to follow, like as a script. We don't have enough time to introduce those books that are so important for our students and their community as well. And somebody also asked, and how those screeners become mandated by the state. It, some of them, especially in Texas, become mandated by the state because the science of reading said, okay, these students, the students in Texas has low rate in reading assessment. So we have to push phonics, grammar to help these students to close the gap. So the state start asking to the district schools to start applying those screeners and sending those data to the law bellies or wherever they're working with that to the TA. And then some of those schools or every school, they need to reach some points or, successfully students to get some fundings for reading. So if you don't meet those, I would say, those goals, you're gonna lose funding. So that's simple as that.
Someone asked to clarify science of reading as curriculum. Does someone want to jump on that?
I think the science of reading definitely is not curriculum, but I think there's a lot of curriculum that is marketing itself as science of reading. And I think that's where things get really tricky, where there's a lot of programs that have claimed science of reading and can theoretically check off a lot of boxes. And then in practice, what you're seeing with these curriculums is that sometimes the boxes, well-meaning boxes that they're checking off, sometimes aren't really being met. Like, for example, in fourth grade, I'm a big fan of morphology. I saw someone ask about UFLI. I actually love the program UFLI, but the programs will say, yes, we teach morphology, and then they'll teach it for like 2 minutes twice a week. And so that's not really teaching morphology. And I think another issue that you're seeing within the curriculum is they're taking one idea from the science of reading, like teaching phonics, which I think is much needed, and maybe they're looking at the research and the prescribed time for first grade, and then they're just copy pasting that throughout the grades. Like, well, maybe first graders need 30 minutes of phonics, and then they're not adjusting the time. And I think lost from just the discussion as a whole is that prescribed time of how much phonics is appropriate in every grade, because a fourth grader, and again, in what we're using, we did QU sounds, like, and the list of words were like, QU says quack, like we can spell quack with QU. And in fourth grade, my fourth graders were like, I can't do this. And they now are like so bought in with morphology. And I had to create my own morphology because I'm like, okay, we're not going to do that. I know that you guys know QU because you did that in kindergarten. So we're going to look at these morphemes and these bigger multisyllable words and the meaning, and we're going to discuss the spelling patterns that you already know. And we're going to discuss when you have to use IBLE as opposed to ABLE. And we're going to do it in 15 minutes because as fourth graders, you don't need 30 minutes of phonics. And there's not that discussion, and the programs don't differentiate between the needs, or the programs I'm sure there might be a program that does. The programs that I have seen and used don't differentiate between the needs of grade levels. And I think that's part of the overcorrection, and part of what's lost in the conversation is exactly what is developmentally appropriate for a kindergartner is not the same need in third grade or fourth grade. And we need to be adjusting so that we can really truly shift from learning to read and understanding the parts of words and the sounds of words, and then shifting to comprehension. Because at the end of the day, whether or not my fourth grader can read a nonsense word doesn't mean anything to me. I need to know, can my kids find meaning out of what they're reading? And that's really, in my opinion, been lost in this conversation, and the, for lack of a better word, prescribed time spent on different types of skills. We're not thinking, or programs rather, I think teachers are, programs are not thinking, what does this age group need? And what is the advice there? It's just the programs and the curriculum has just thrown this one prescribed time to all grade levels. And we're finding it's not just not working, it's making kids not want to engage?
Legislation that was passed in Wisconsin didn't in itself mandate science of reading aligned curriculum, but it did mandate the specific pieces that curricula either must have or cannot have. And one of the things that cannot have is any reference to the language of 3Qing. So the language itself outside of the curriculum actually can't be used at all. So we are not supposed to say to kids, does it sound right? Does it make sense? And when you think about how, how any student learns to read, but in particular, multilingual learners, asking someone if it makes sense is a very important part of how they learn new vocabulary. And when you think of words, I had a student just recently that confused the word read and read, and was trying to think through which one made sense in the context. And then it would be perfectly logical to say, well, does that sound right? I'm not sure how else you would get someone to arrive at that conclusion without using that language. But then there was a separate committee at the state level, and there was not a single practicing educator on the committee that was used to select the curriculum. There were 4 that were put on that list, curricula, I guess I should say, that were selected that districts could choose from to be reimbursed if they decided that they wanted to go that route. And of those 4, at least one there's concerns that it's culturally harmful. So I am concerned about the fact that what that committee chose to lift up to educators across our state is something that would have harmful effects for kids down the road. And our own Department of Public Instruction, I think, was so concerned. I mean, I don't want to speak on their behalf, but was so concerned about just limiting it to those 4 choices that they then, and I don't know what the process was for that, but they were able to then put a few other programs on the list. And when my district and our literacy team looked at the different programs, we brought in teachers across grade levels as a whole and pretty much resoundingly said that the initial 4 that the committee chose were the first 4 that we would never consider using. And I know that that's not the case across the state. So I'm sure there are people who are happy with, maybe their selections or whatever the case may be. But the programs in and of themselves weren't specifically mandated. It was just there was a lot of money tied to whether or not you chose something from that list.
I found too that a lot of my students, I call them over decoders, where they decode everything. And so to ask, does that make sense, is perfectly appropriate, but you're worried the science of reading police are going to come and tell you that was not allowed. And that narrowing of the curriculum is not going to be helpful for our kids, especially our kids who need extra support. We need to be able to use every tool in our toolkit, and asking them, does that make sense, is really important because they're not monitoring for that. And so what they're reading is just nonsense and trying to letter by letter sound. And it's just not helpful to continue to teach them letter sounds when they're attempting to use them over and over again, but they're not thinking about meaning.
Someone asked if these mandates hold some students back. Does someone want to jump on that? Does it impede someone's literacy progress or a group of students' literacy progress?
Well, our original legislation before it was passed actually had 3rd grade retention as part of, so I know that's not direct to the question, but there was an intent by legislators who are not teachers to retain children if they didn't reach their, sort of arbitrary benchmarks. That was removed, but we are still looking at a 3rd grade retention policy. I don't know if we know yet. There are some things that I think may turn out to be really beneficial in some areas in terms of the science of reading mandates. One of them being some of the professional development that is being offered is actually really good. And I've been fairly pleased with the professional development that our district selected for all of its reading staff. Unfortunately, it's so condensed and so intense that I'm not sure how much people are able to absorb and take back with them. But I think for students themselves, when I'll use my daughter as an example, when you didn't know that you had a reading problem because you didn't have a reading problem, but now the state has told you that you have a reading problem, you start to define yourself as a reader differently when the way that you've been reading is suddenly reduced to how many correct words you can read in a minute. And if that's the thing that you're not great at, but the thing that you were great at was comprehension and vocabulary and making connections and thinking about the meanings of individual words and their roots, and then all of a sudden that's not weighted nearly the same, and the one thing that's used to trigger whether or not you need a reading plan is how quickly you read. You do start, I see it with her, you start to think, oh my gosh, I'm not a reader, I'm not good at this. And I have seen personally in my own home a decline in how much reading she chooses to do for pleasure, because she's learned, no matter what I say. I mean, sometimes I say to her, honey, this is my job. You have to trust me when I tell you that you're a reader and you're good at it. She's like, no, but I have to take this test and I don't read fast enough. The way that she thinks about herself has definitely gone downhill. And at the same time, because of the reading plan, she's being removed, not from the core curriculum, but she's still being removed from the classroom for part of her day. So no, she's not missing the lesson, but she's being othered. And she's kind of getting this, sort of threatening sense that I'm not worthy maybe of being a part of the classroom community where all of the rest of my kids are. And this has only been going on for a couple of months, but I cannot believe down the road that that's not going to have a negative effect on her overall self-concept and reading ability.
And I can speak from the dyslexia parent end. I think when the SOR rollouts first came out, I was actually, I think, very optimistic about it, especially again, as knowing dyslexia runs in my family and how important Orton Gillingham instruction is, although I think it's being treated as a silver bullet and it is not. I was very optimistic and thankful that my daughter was going into school during this time in our district where we had many teachers that because I don't know if it was directly because of the SOR mandates, I think it was more my district just wanting to do this and being ahead of the mandates, but so many districts having access to training with things like Orton Gillingham. And I was very relieved that my daughter, who is dyslexic, is going to get the best fit instruction with tier 1 and explicit instruction. And she's going to get the best fit in intervention. And my school does a really great job with after a direct instruction, the block, all the kids go somewhere. So nobody really is feeling othered. And I think that is part of the nuance of all of this, is it is getting lost. Also, I think from the dyslexia parent end with this, some of the curriculum out there that is, again, in 4th grade, you're reading the same story, the same passage 5 times. And when you have that delicate balance of a kid who is struggling and who, even with phonics, I think she still got sick to her stomach because phonics was hard and phonics still is hard and reading is hard. And what dyslexia is makes all of that hard. And having access to the interventions and having access to the science, all the things that science of reading says that she needed access to, made it easier, but it didn't make it easy for her. And she still was impacted emotionally by the struggles of reading. And then I think compounded by, since there is that lack of nuance And there's not that, again, I feel like with the science of reading, we had to step away from admitting that kids also do need to love how to read. There is that, like, I feel like a lack of that connection. Sometimes with her, like, well, okay, I'm doing all of this. I love my interventionist. I guess doing all of this stuff is like, okay, she is the model student, but like, I think lost in some of the curriculum choices and how the curriculum presents what reading is like, well, then what is the point of reading though, is my fear with some kids. Because when it's presented as, we're just going to read this passage and we're going to write an essay every single time we read, and we're going to highlight and annotate this passage, this same exact passage 5 times a week, that purpose of reading is really lost. And that's where I see in the upper grades, maybe kids losing interest in reading, which will make them fall behind, because they do need that, again, that but and.
So here's a question, I'm rephrasing it from someone. You know, the answer seems very simple to some people, just simply more phonics. But this more phonics over the last 40 years has not worked. So why is there this continual push for more phonics? And how did the state legislature know there wasn't enough phonics? Of all the variables, how did they decide that phonics was both the problem and the solution to the alleged reading crisis? That's a complicated question.
I think that was like the big media push though, right? Was that there was this big media push that there was one problem and one problem only. And that problem is one curriculum that wasn't even adopted by the whole entire country. And supposedly, I think the statistics are 25% of the country adopted that one curriculum that was really vilified rather. And that discussion in popular media was because one curriculum supposedly didn't teach phonics at all. We're going to pretend like the only thing that happened in all of America was no teacher on the face of planet Earth knew about or taught phonics, even though Orton Gillingham has been around for 100 years. If it cured dyslexia, we would know. It's been around for 100 years. And so I think that bigger in the news discussion really overpowered the pressure for states to legislate this too quickly without thinking and without moving past. There's more to this than phonics. And now we're stuck. And I think a lot of the big voices that were pushing phonics so hard are also stuck in this. No, there's more than just phonics. There's this whole rope, which is also like 20 years old, right? Scarborough's rope. But it's hard to move away from that because that dominated the conversation for 5 years. And now it dominated the legislation. And moving away from there's so much more than just phonics has been really, is what I've seen.
So was there a reading crisis in your experience? Was there a reading crisis?
Like in my district in school?
The 4 of you here, did you experience a reading crisis? Was there this score that just suddenly dropped off? No.
And I think you need to remember there's always going to be kids, no matter what curriculum or approach you choose, that aren't going to, it's not going to fit their needs. So right now we are heavily focused on phonics. I still have the same number of students in intervention than I did before we had this current curriculum. It's the students maybe come with different skills, but no curriculum is a silver bullet. And I think what's concerning is the media portrayal of this is the only way and this is the best way and this will solve the problem. When teachers' voices and educators aren't included in that conversation, that's what we get, right? It's a black and white issue. And you leave out the nuance and you leave out how complex reading really is and how complex it is to teach it. And you get this simple answer. It really does harm students and it makes it very difficult to meet everybody's needs.
So what is the answer?
I would agree that we are not in the reading crisis because we are saying the same thing, or the experts that are pushing these programs and curriculum, they're saying is the phonics. But we say the same thing almost 30 years ago when they create this report. And even one of the participants, I read about it, Catherine Snow, she sent a memorandum saying, hey, okay, phonics is important, but remember, behind that is a lot that we need to focus to make our readers as a whole. So she even said it by then. And here we are again, 30 years after, discussing the same thing. And I'm thinking right now that, as Kate said, we are trying to fit one shoes and every single fit. And that doesn't gonna happen. We can do that. And I think right now they are not listening to the experts. And who are the experts? The teachers. And I can count myself because I'm not right now in the classroom, but there are so many wonderful teachers that can tell you, hey, we can do this. And as my colleagues right here, I'm seeing right now a decline in the reading. I can see it. Our kids are not engaging anymore in reading. And I know the good intentions behind the sign of reading. Yes, it will help some struggle readers to decoding and encoding. Yes, that's true. But there is no any or say classes or professional development to help our teachers to teach comprehension. And that is a huge part too. I have so many students that were very slow readers, but their comprehension was perfect. So that doesn't mean that one student is a slow reader, is a bad reader. So some of these screeners are taking time and their students are failing, but that test or that screener doesn't mean that that student is a bad reader or is a risk.
I think the other thing to remember too is like that crisis narrative is not new. And it's been around, I mean, almost since the 1890s. Like there's constant cycles of public education is failing our students. And this is just the newest wave of that. And it often comes from special interest groups or they manufacture a crisis and come up with the fix. And there's a lot of money tied to those fixes. So it's really, as teachers, we want the best for our students, and that we're constantly trying to find and learn how to best teach our kids. But when the people who are making the decisions are in it to line their own pockets, it's very disheartening, and it causes, again, a lot of harm for our students and for public education.
You can't make money on a solution unless you've created a problem. So that's definitely, I think, a huge part of it. But I also think that this, so-called crisis, I guess, that they referred to is somewhat the result of teaching what's easily tested, because the testing companies as well, I think about, because we as a state mandated one screener for every district in the entire state of Wisconsin. How much money was there to be made for that one company, when then no other companies can, come in and put out bids for that or whatever. But there isn't necessarily money to be made on teacher expertise. I mean, by giving us additional professional development, I doubt that a lot of companies, make a lot off of that, unless we go back to, universities or whatever, and that's a very lengthy process. So we're very impatient as a culture. I think we want, the answer yesterday, and so let's hurry up and make this happen. But when you continue to change products, you can continue to make money by requiring new purchases. And if you only train teachers to make them smarter and better, then there's not a continuing opportunity to get wealthier, I guess.
And I think there's that like overpromise again, like from the dyslexia lens, and Orton Gillingham certified. And I love me a good Orton Gillingham program, but it's being sold as it's going to fix dyslexia, and it's not. It's going to equip kids with tools. But when you create this like overwhelming crisis and it was caused by this one thing, and here's this one fix that is surely going to fix it all, and it will fix it quickly. And I think I guess there's like some cases where it did fix it quickly, and I would argue maybe that's not truly dyslexia. But when you're selling it as, I have this one product, it will absolutely fix it. And then what we're going to see, because again, like these are not new, profound, it's not even new, profound science. Most of the articles that and research that people are referring to are from like 1999 at earliest. We would know if it was a sure fix. So we're going to like sell it as a fix. We're going to make a lot of money. It's not going to cure everything. And then we're going to swing to the other end instead of like all the things that you're talking about, which is training teachers, ensuring that we're attracting and retaining highly qualified teachers, and understanding that somewhere in the middle is this nuance, this both and from kind of both sides, so to speak, where, I mean, like I came from this world where I didn't even know what balanced literacy was until I moved to Colorado. But like balanced literacy just didn't come out of nowhere. It came out of things that obviously worked for kids. There's like parts of structured literacy and parts of balanced literacy that obviously work or they wouldn't exist. But we're not going in the middle and discussing the nuance and how difficult it is to truly meet the needs of all these various students. And we're just like selling these quick fixes that aren't quick fixes. And we shouldn't allow people to do that.
Well, and in reality, structured literacy, like you mentioned, Orton Gillingham, that may be the best thing for student A. But when you don't allow teachers to make the decision based on what they inherently know, using their professional judgment and expertise, you are so limiting opportunities for students to learn and grow.
Absolutely. And I think that's so lost from these conversations, especially when things are mandated, and the experts, the teachers, are never consulted in these mandates. That's what's lost, that reality that, of course, this method worked or it wouldn't exist. And this student probably needs this, and this student might need something completely different. And I fear with science of reading, SOR in general, and especially with the mandates, that what you just talked about is what has really been lost, and it's really going to be what ends up harming kids.
And it's interesting that as our nation as a whole is becoming increasingly diverse, that we would cling to something that's very much a one size fits all fix.
Yeah, and that piggyback with what Sarah and Melinda are saying, if we see every person learns in a different pace and in a different way, we can pretend to teach reading, which is a complex and natural, because it's a natural skill. We can teach in the same way to every single student. So one curriculum, one mandate, magical, I don't know, measure won't solve the problem. And we have been seeing, as you say, Melinda, these crises have been happening since 1800s. So, hey, we are again in the same thing. So, and I agree with all of you, that is a lot of monetary interest there too.
So I want to throw one thing out, and then we're going to go for a last round because we're getting close to the allotted time here. Where do you see this story ending? How does this story end?
I see a lot of teachers leaving the profession faster than they already are. It's really hard to teach and do what's best for kids when you can't do your job and tailor your instruction to what's best for kids. And through mandates and, punitive things from the state level, and kind of this watchdog kind of gotcha mentality makes it really uncomfortable sometimes to try to do what's best for your students if it doesn't align with what has been mandated.
I think that this will be used as a catalyst to continue to move education towards a more privatized system, because this will be used any failures of the public school system will be then held up because of all of this data collection that we're now submitting to the state and whatnot, will be used to hold up our failures and to further promote or be used as evidence to say, look at everything that teachers and education in the country are doing wrong. We need to have private entities take over, and there will be additional opportunities for people to profit off of the backs of our children.
Well, I would say the biggest lose here is our students. They are the one that being harmed. And as Kate said, teachers, really good teachers, are leaving the classrooms en masses, and we are being under desperate districts, hiring people that most of the time are not suited for this job, because I believe that teaching is a passion. Teaching is a call, and if you don't have it, you don't gonna do well in a classroom, because you need a lot of skills, a lot of emotional, a lot of psychological skills to love those kids and teach them. So at the end, the ones that are being harmed are our students. No matter what curriculum they mandate to establish, no matter how many laws they do, they are not thinking about our students. So that's the sad part of about this.
I'm going to be a little optimistic. I'm hoping what this does is moves the conversation towards understanding that there is no perfect curriculum, and curriculum isn't what's going to solve the problem. And I'm hoping, again, optimistically, that we'll move towards understanding that what will solve the quote unquote problem is attracting and retaining highly qualified teachers, and making sure that teachers truly are trained in what the science says and what the research says, and that we are equipped with the tools and high quality tools. I'm hoping that the conversation moves to that, so that we know, okay, we tried this, we did all these mandates again for, I don't know, the 20th time in 40 years. And we're noticing that when we stick these curriculums and have teachers teach it with fidelity, and we don't give them the professional judgment to adapt the tool in front of them to what the students need, then what's lost is student growth. And I'm hoping, and again, I'm being so optimistic, and maybe I should stop being optimistic, that that is what we will learn from this, is there is not a perfect curriculum. We need to equip teachers with supports and tools to use high quality materials, and hopefully get high quality materials in their hands so that they can use their expertise, because that is the answer. It's not going to be in a curriculum. And I think these mandates kind of come off with the perception that the answer is one of these curriculums from the list. The answer is one of these screeners from the list. And we know, the teachers know, that's not the answer. So that's where I'm hoping.
And if we're not hopeful, what are we doing?
Yeah, that's how I'm staying as a teacher right now, with that hope in mind.
Any other answers for us from our other panelists? All right, let's leave it here for tonight. I like a 1 hour. I want more, but always leave them wanting more. So I want to thank you, teachers, for your dedication and for your willingness to come on here and share your perspective. And people out in the audience, we're always willing to have new participants to these panel discussions, so you can contact me. So with that, people, I have a recording of this, and I'll send it out to everyone who is registered for this webinar. So with that, I bid you good night, and I thank you panelists so very much again. And people are thanking you too, so that's wonderful. Thank you for your work, and thank you for your willingness to talk about this.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Good night, everybody, and I'll be here in case someone wants to chat. And I'm going to figure out how to save the chat. There were so many questions, and I know people are still here. I couldn't get to all the questions, and I felt bad about that, but we're limited. I will be sending out a YouTube recording to this, people. I will send out a YouTube recording of this. I will download that and send it out. Someone asked, someone asked if I would chat more. Well, this wasn't my conversation. This was your conversation. Someone thought this would be great for their professional development, and absolutely. Absolutely. I learned from you tonight. Elena, I learned that you have to create a whole new curriculum for these other students. This is what people aren't understanding. And 60 extra hours of work, my goodness. All right. Okay, I'm going to learn how to save the chat. Does any of you know how to save the chat? I'm really being pushed. Okay.
I think in the bottom where you see the square and the happy face, the emoticon face, there are 3 dots.
Yep.
If you click there, it says save chat.
Okay, I'll do that. All right. Well, thank you for attending, and I'm going to figure out how to save the chat, and I will see you later. And I have stopped the